come on up. You have a seat here. Get Nat and Anna back up here. That was fantastic. That kind of blew my mind.
Thanks.
You managed to articulate stuff that's been like, yes, that. Although I did want to say, just for future reference, if you're going to give that talk again, you might want to give a trigger warning about SOAP and web services. See Paul Downey there at the back of the room with the camera? He's seen things, man.
I've edited it just for him.
Yeah, he's having flashbacks. So, okay, so do you get pushback when you talk about this stuff in the sense like, you just don't get it, Grandpa. You're just not down with the
all
cool
the time.
kids.
Yes, all the time. That's exactly it. My appearance might further that problem. But the thing is that people tend to fall in love with technology, and they become very, very attached once they've learned how to use it. So they're very attached to whatever, React or Angular or Ember or whatever it is. And if you come and tell them, well, maybe that's not the right thing, that's not the right architecture, you should have done something different. It's very hard to get them out of that hole they've dug themselves into. But sometimes you just lose and then you go somewhere else. That's okay.
But it seems like there's commonality obviously running through all of this stuff. You can articulate at the end, which is that stop fighting the web and stuff that's kind of built into the web and go with the flow. But does that mean like you're giving up control? I mean, do you get pushback when you try to say like, yeah, just design for any possible screen, and people say no, it has to have this font or it has to look like this?
I think people are more and more aware that, you know, just from their sort of everyday experiences with technology, that things are not straightforward and there are lots of different contexts. And I think a lot of clients that I work with are certainly, they're happy to hear that things are basically very flexible and you have to sort of have certain principles, but things are not going to be, you know, you can't control the outcome as much as you would like to.
I do worry that, you know, we talk at conferences like this to these audiences, designers, developers, and yeah, we get it. Okay, you can't control it all, you know, go with it, go with the grain of the web. But we're not necessarily the decision makers, right? And how do we get that message to the people who actually, you know, make those choices? I don't know if you've had any experiences with trying to convince the people who insist that it's got to be this big monolithic, you know, JavaScript dependent framework. Any war stories?
I've been extremely lucky that my clients trusted my opinion, that, you know, we should not make certain choices. I mean, I build single-page web apps very occasionally when I think that that is the right solution. I've built certain art project sites that basically couldn't have happened any other way. So I think like those things are definitely a viable and a reasonable choice. Just you know, it's a kind of trade-off you have to know how to make. You've given up something in exchange for something else, and I think when you explain to clients what the trade-offs are, it makes it very easy for them to make a decision and agree with you.
Yeah. Anna, how did you get into the consoles and gaming devices and browsers on that? Where did that come from?
So I was doing a project for a client who their users were children in primary schools, so ages sort of 6 to 11. And we went into the schools to kind of find out what devices they were using, what sort of browsers they had, if they had internet at home. So we did a survey and we were asking, what do you have at home? And there was one class where every single child had a Nintendo DS. So I decided to buy one to see what the interface was like, what sort of things they were used to. And I realised it had a browser on it. So I thought it'd be funny to kind of write an article about the browser and what its capabilities are. And then I realised that lots of consoles had browsers. And I couldn't find anything that was written about it, so I decided to start documenting it.
Yeah. Nat, I wanted to sort of push back on something you mentioned. You're talking about testing with screen reader software like VoiceOver. It's really easy to set up, but should we be the ones testing with screen reader software, or should it be more like that's kind of thinking of like browser testing? But is it not more like usability testing?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Like you can't get away with not doing usability testing at all and just assume that, well, I've turned on VoiceOver once, it seems to work, it's fine. But it's one of those things that a lot of the time it might uncover stuff that it's just so obvious once you start using it that you can make an improvement straight away with before you even go to.
So it's like the low-hanging
testing.
fruit. You catch the really obvious kind of problems.
It doesn't replace user
Right.
testing.
And slightly technical question for you, Anna, but you're talking about how a mobile interface often looks better on a large screen TV because it's so far away, and you can't user sniff, right? User agent sniff. Is there any way of giving a large screen the small screen styles?
No.
Okay. I was hoping there's some secret you'd have. No. Yeah, still bad. Stefan, you've got the long-term perspective. You've got the history lesson there. Is there a lesson throughout all of this, and maybe I'm extrapolating too much, that simplicity will always win out in the end? I mean, looking at the history of the web, looking at the history of REST versus SOAP.
Well, I think it's definitely the case that some ideas are very, very hard to kill. I'm sure you've read many articles about how dead the web is.
Mm-hmm.
It comes up every few years. It's replaced by by push and by Flash and by Silverlight and by native apps, and it's pretty tough to kill. So I do attribute a lot of it to its simplicity, although it's really simplicity. It's not easy. It's right. It has a certain quality to it that is, I think, pretty unique. I'm sure it can't survive for the next 500 years. Something is going to replace it, but so far I haven't seen anything that strikes the same balance of things.
So like I said, I felt like there's the theme running through everything you were all talking about. It's about stop trying to control everything tightly, let go with the flow, go with the flow of the web. Do you find that's an uncomfortable truth to live with, or does it make you feel good? I think some people find it very uncomfortable, the idea that you can't predict what device someone's going to be using. You can't predict the situation, the network connection someone's going to be in. Is it a good thing?
Well, a while back, when the iPad mini came out and people realised you couldn't detect that something was an iPad mini as opposed to an iPad. Yeah. And I remember Wilto tweeted about this, saying basically by making it undetectable, it forces you to make the experience better for everyone. And yeah, we work in the web, which is completely, if we wanted control, we'd be software designers and developers. So I think that's our job, is to embrace that change. And you might make something that works for these specific scenarios, and then later something new comes out and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So we have to support standards in order to kind of preempt that.
Right. So giving up assumptions, I guess, right? Which is a scary prospect.
What's that thing you say about assumptions?
Yeah, assumptions make an ass out of you and assumptions. Okay, I'm going to throw it open to questions. Who's got questions for these fantastic speakers? Yes?
It's a question for Anna.
Oh, we've got a microphone here. Apologies.
I don't have to shout.
Yeah.
So basically, if clients realise that consoles were so important, they would ask you to consider that a specific design phase, right? And clearly, if it is important, then they can generate revenue from supporting those screens better, because most clients want to run a business. How do you go about sort of explaining to a customer, which is perhaps not the example you gave earlier, that there is revenue potential to be had here and they should consider it?
To consider console users?
Yes, in the design process.
It's generally if it's a site that uses video, because a lot of people like to watch video on websites, so that's quite a good use case. We can look at their stats. I mean, I was working at the University of Surrey, and just out of interest, I went to see what stats they had for how many people were actually using the site on console, and we found that people were. There were actually Nintendo DSs in the stats, and I guess it's so difficult to actually build something that is going to be usable on a console without knowing that it's a console. So you do generally have to make it better for everyone. So it's just a case of designing for that in mind. And I don't specifically sell, I'm going to make this really usable on a console. That's just part of what I'm thinking about when I'm doing it.
When you mentioned there about, I think was it Surrey University?
Yeah.
How did they find out that the traffic was coming from consoles?
It was just in the Google Analytics. It's one of the devices that was coming up. I think it was a PS3. A few people were using it. Yeah. It wasn't a big number, but it was enough that they were kind of surprised that people were using that on campus.
I do find it interesting when it comes to this kind of stuff. A lot of times the questions aren't about how do I achieve this from a technical point of view. It's like, how do I convince?
Yeah.
Convincing people.
Shouldn't need to, I think.
It seems like more and more that's our job, right?
Yeah.
Is that we've got to be selling this idea, convincing people. More questions. All right, we got one. Well, we'll take you first, and then we'll get to you. So, got the microphone.
Thank you. I have a question, I suppose, primarily to Anna, but if anyone wants to pick it up, I'll be very appreciative. Wicked devices in general. I work in an industry that requires heavy image users because that's how people interact with it. And this has been driving me mad for a very long time. And recently, actually, I attended a very good talk from Tim Catlett, who was talking about the cost of image decoding, both on memory side and CPU, which actually is surprisingly high. Well, not surprisingly, it is high. There is no, that I know of, any API or media query that targets memory or CPU or capabilities of that kind of stuff. How did you resolve, if you resolved it at all, kind of negotiation of what kind of media to serve to these devices, if you managed to do it at all?
You mean to make the performance better?
Yes, to, for example, pick the less media.
Often it's just things like the scrolling that will be really sluggish if you're using lots of JavaScript, like if you've got parallax scrolling. Like if you just take out all that fancy stuff, it generally makes it a lot easier. Yeah, images do take a while to load, and as long as you're optimizing them, you're doing all the kind of best practices with that. That's all you can really do. But also things like if you're using opacity, like CSS opacity, that really slows things down. So often it's just a case of turning things off and seeing if that improves things.
So consoles do not utilize GPU as much?
They've just got a lot less memory that they can allocate to the browser. So yeah, like if you run, like with the CSS3 test, if you run that on a desktop browser, like on Chrome or whatever, it'll take a few seconds. If you run it on a 3ds XL, it will take often 3 minutes.
Right.
Like, and I'm sitting there waiting for it to finish.
Okay.
Could you pass the microphone just back there? Perfect.
I have another one for Anna. Actually, is there any sane way to test for all these consoles?
No.
Like, besides buying all the devices?
Oh, for actually try them out?
Yeah, something like Browser Stack or something? So you can test
Browser Stack doesn't have consoles.
No,
noticed.
sure not.
I mean, you can business expense them.
Try.
Yeah.
How did you actually make these like HTML and CSS tests? Like
I didn't make them. They're so it's HTML5test.com and CSS, like CSS3 test is Leroux. HTML5 test is I can't remember his name. Do you know? It's, he's on Twitter as well. He's a real person. He has the HTML5 test avatar. But yeah, they're run by the people.
You may have a local device lab that could have.
Yeah, sure.
Anna has kindly donated many a gaming console to the Brighton Device Lab, which is at Clear Left offices, if anybody ever wants to come around and test. So because it's kind of crazy that, how can we all go out and get these devices? But if we pull together, it'd be easier. Can I get a show of hands of anyone who's got questions in general? I just want to get, can we get a question? Here first, please.
I've got one for Stefan about, I'm a React.js developer, but I found your talk quite interesting nevertheless. I'm wondering how you would propose to do sort of dynamic apps, web apps, that users can actually interact with, and not just, in terms of like, I see text, I can click on a link.
Yeah. So I think, to be honest, I think that's a misconception, right? There's a misconception, I think, that you have to build a single-page app or a very, very JavaScript-heavy app, a JavaScript-centric app to get a good user experience. I don't find that to be the case at all. The basic interaction is just in a manner of separating concerns. The first thing you build is an ugly website. Well, it doesn't have to be ugly. It's a functional website, and then you make it pretty, and then you have something that looks like it was built in 1997. And then you add JavaScript where it makes sense. So you replace boring components by more interesting components, you make interactions more fluent, you embed stuff instead of following links. It's hard to explain without waving the hands around a lot, but the idea is that you have the information architecture that you would have had in 1997, but the user experience of 2016. And I think that's absolutely doable. So some of my colleagues are in the audience who actually do that instead of just talking about it. So you might want to talk to them. And we have a lot of sites, a lot of apps, I don't see much of a difference, that actually are very nice to look at, very nice to interact with, and don't rely on a Java-centric approach.
And
Thank you.
I guess those Roca principles, speak to that. Here's how you get to that.
Exactly.
And it comes back to what you were talking about, Nat, about beginning by asking, well, what is it that the user wants? And rarely is the answer to that question, oh, the user wants to drag and drop, or the user wants to, it's going to be something, I want to get access to information, I want to complete a transaction, right? I guess it's about the verbs.
Right, even though I don't think there's anything wrong with drag and drop as an optional additional feature
but it's not,
for those
it's
who
generally not what a user would say, oh, I got up this morning, I was really looking forward to dragging and dropping, right?
That's probably true, yeah.
All right, I guess we'll give Remy the microphone, sure.
So I've got a question kind of for Anna and Stefan, with apologies to Nat. With things like push notifications from websites, where the content is actually coming to us rather than us actually going off and requesting it. On the games console, the HTML5 tests, is there a ceiling to those tests, and are they even mentioning, looking at things like push notifications into consoles from the web? Does the test even cover that? I don't know what the HTML5 test tests, whether any browsers in consoles kind of support that, or TVs. And also with respect to kind of, the traditional RESTful model of a browser kind of requesting a page and going from link to link, actually having the content pushed to us in a, consuming it in a different way, and yet still being of the web, it's kind of giving us the link. Any thoughts about that?
Tried using jQuery.
Nice.
That's a standard answer to everything.
The browser tests that it runs, it actually has a list of all of the things that pass and fail. I think push notifications is on there, but for the CSS support, it will list exactly which selectors it pass and fail, and the same with the HTML5 test. Although some browsers, I found with the Xbox 360, it was reporting that it supported some things like geolocation that it didn't support. And the HTML5 tests were actually rewritten in response to that. So it's important. Don't take them with a pinch of salt. Don't think that because it says it supports it that it does, because like user agent strings, sometimes it lies. It says it supports something and it doesn't.
And so, Stefan, is push fundamentally different to the RESTful architecture, or is it an enhancement?
Well, I mean, a key constraint in RESTful architecture is that it's client-server, so the client should initiate that. So I would say something like WebSocket is definitely against the architecture of the web. But I think that you could use something like server-sent events, which I think is a very underestimated and undervalued technology, which actually follows the web model. I don't know how many of you know that SSE spec, where actually the client initiates a connection and gets back a continuous response stream that's mapped to JavaScript events in the browser, so you can use that to progressively enhance your page with updates from the server, and you can use the same model for push notifications as an optional feature that you use to progressively enhance the user experience. If it's impossible to use the application without that feature, then maybe it's not a good use case for that model. I'm not saying that this Roca style or this traditional style is always, and I totally agree with Nat here, sometimes the best thing to build is something different. So you build a native app or maybe an SPA, and that's fine. Just not, the key thing that I'm always bothered by is when people do that without knowing the alternative. If you make a conscious decision that that's not what you want to build something different, fine. But if you just build because everybody else is doing it and because it was Google who told you so, that's not a good architectural strategy.
Do you ever feel like you're surrounded by pod people? Like, am I the only sane person left in the world?
No, there are a lot of people who agree with that. I think. More than you think.
I think maybe, okay, we've got to let Paul get the microphone. Is that okay, Simon, if we let him have?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's not, I'm trying to address this as a question, so with that horrible thing I'm making is sort of a point I know.
More of a statement.
But I can sort of offer a question at the end of it. So it's a mild grump that there's a lot of stuff there was quantitative, arguments about devices. And actually, we don't build for devices, we build for users. And you showed some of the Nat showed lots of gov.uk stuff, which made me swallow with pride because I had minor involvement in some of that stuff. But the bits where we've had the biggest changes of direction with architects who are mad, and with people who are sort of obsessed with devices, is when we've actually confronted them with users trying to use our stuff. And gov.uk, we have people who you can totally empathise with, who are applying for disability or of suffering bereavement or whatever. Yeah. And then you confront them with them trying to use a website that's just JavaScript heavy. Doesn't work.
Well,
Do you have similar stories?
I thought there was a great balance in the 3 talks, in that you're coming from a very human-centered point of view, thinking about these use cases of the people. It's not about technology. You're coming from the architecture point of view. And that what people can take away is, well, use the right argument in the right situation. Who are you talking to? Who's the audience? And all right, I'm gonna pull out those anecdotes from Nat, or I'm gonna pull out the anecdotes from Stefan or from Anna. Would you agree that it depends who you're talking to? Like, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So there you go. Perfect. All right, that wraps it up nicely. Okay, time for a break. Half-hour break, is that right, Simon? Or, well, a bit less now.
Something like that. We'll tell you when it's time to come back up anyway.
Okay, we'll do that. So go get some coffee and some tea. But before you go, how about thanking Stefan and Nat and Anna? All right.